Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Great to be back doing webinars, not that we ever stop at Creditor Watch. I've got the fabulous Ali Kane with us today, as well as our moderator. Ali, thank you as always for joining.
Good morning, Patrick, or good afternoon, I should say.
That's right, just gone afternoon. Thanks to everyone for coming online and joining today. We've still got plenty of people signing on, which is good. We'll do a very quick intro and get into the good stuff. We've got a fantastic panel with us today. No slides, just discussion. Ali likes to ask the tough questions. She's very structured, but she also likes to put people under pressure every now and again and make sure she gets the full answer out of them, which I love. That's why we love having you with us, Ali, so thank you for that. As always, please ask questions along the way. I know Ali will reiterate that, but don't be shy. There's a question and answer box for you within the GoToWebinar control panel. So please ask away, and we should have some time at the end for some Q&A. If you wanted to ask a specific panelist, sorry, get my words right there, just pop their name in the question as well, just to make it a little bit easier for us to direct it. We always get plenty of questions, which is good. And that's it from me. So Ali, I'll let you take over and you can run the show.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Now I'll ask all of our esteemed panelists to please turn on their cameras while I do a quick introduction. So welcome everybody to today's Creditor Watch webinar, Rebuilding Australia's Construction Sector. As Patrick kindly introduced me, my name is Ali Kane. I'm a finance journalist and your moderator today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're on and their leaders past, present, and future. So what a wild ride for the construction sector, one of the hardest hit during the pandemic and beyond. First, lockdowns shut down work sites, then supply chain problems sent the price of inputs such as timber and steel through the roof. Even getting tradies has become a great Australian dream. If you happen to know of a Tyler, please let me know. Cap this off with a spate of high-profile company failures. So what does the future hold for this sector in 2023 and beyond? That's the topic for today's webinar, drawing on Creditor Watch's proprietary data published in the monthly Business Risk Index, which I believe is out tomorrow. So I'm joined by an esteemed panel of experts this morning, and I would like to introduce them. We've heard already from Creditor Watch CEO Patrick Coghlan. Good morning, Patrick, once again.
Yeah, good to be here.
I'd also like to welcome Adam DeMarco, founder and publisher of The Urban Developer. Very nice to see you, Adam.
Very nice to see you as well. Good morning from Queensland, but good afternoon from the southern states.
We're also joined by Sarah Slattery, the Managing Director of quantity surveyor firm Slattery. Good morning, Sarah.
Thanks for having me, Ali. Great to be here.
I'm also pleased to welcome Jeanette Mueller, Director of GM Advisory. Good morning, Jeanette.
Good morning, Ali, and thanks for having me, Patrick and Ali. It's great to be here.
And our last panelist, but certainly not least, is Michelle Eisenberg, Chief Data and Research Officer of BCI Central. Good morning, Michelle. So before we kick off, or as we kick off, I'd like to start with Patrick. So Patrick, there's been a lot going on in the construction sector. What are some of the salient industries the businesses in this industry are facing at the moment?
Yeah, good question. And I think there's sort of three main things. There's the obvious supply chain challenges that have existed. There's inflation, which is certainly hit the cost of products, materials, and then labour shortages as well. And I think the one good thing is if we look at supply chain, there's an index that I've been following the last few months that someone else introduced me to. I certainly didn't discover it myself, but it's the New York Fed have like this supply chain index, and the headline number at the moment is that we're pretty much back to possibly even below Feb 2020 figures, which is really positive. So supply chain issues seem to be behind us somewhat, which is good. And if you think back a few months, it wasn't that long ago that there was huge delays. That doesn't mean that that the cost of freight has reduced. And, we know that went up sort of 10 times, and we know that materials are still really expensive and some hard to come by. But I think where there is a material that can be actually purchased because they can afford it, it is being delivered a little bit quicker, and there's obviously that's a fairly generic global view, which is good. I think there's we're seeing a softening in the labour market as well, and that's coming off a very high though, so at least it's heading in the right direction, and I think the inflation and interest rate increases will only put more pressure on that. So that's a good thing from a hiring perspective. We've obviously seen what's happening in the tech space, but that's not necessarily happening in the construction space. But yeah, look, inflation and interest rate rises are putting a lot of pressure on all industries, particularly construction. And I'll save. I do have a question of my own later on, Ali, that I'll ask of everyone. Someone can jump in. If I've put a note down, so please remind me if I do forget.
So you reckon I should be able to find some tilers soon?
I think so. That Adam may be able to be better positioned to correct me on that one.
So if the supply chain is normalising, what does that mean for the sector? Does it mean, prices for bills will normalise? How will businesses be affected?
Look, I think if you can get goods, that means projects are continuing hopefully at a normal pace. Right, we get the materials in, it's continuing at a normal price. Doesn't take away the fact that they're really expensive, and those with the obvious fixed price contracts, they're still in a total spot of bother. So that's a positive, right? And the labor sort of softening as well is a positive, but it doesn't mean that they're out of the woods. It probably just means that there's slightly less pressure on the industry as a whole.
Obviously, the business risk index is a key part of what Creditor Watch does, and it is coming out tomorrow, and I have had a sneak peek. So I'm wondering if you want to talk through any of the trends, maybe not revealing what the index is going to say, but what the data says about what construction is doing.
Yeah, look, I think construction's another industry where you look at the weather, you've got to keep an eye on the weather, and that's just caused such havoc, right? And I can see Adam nodding his head. You sort of take it for granted, but if you're building a house or you're in the CBD, you just see how slow projects have been. So I think they're welcoming the end of La Nina, and hopefully she disappears for a while and doesn't come back for a few years, so we can catch back up. So I think that's a positive. Construction's, traditionally, even in boom years, is a risky industry. There's large projects, thin margins, and there's room for error at the end of the day. So it's traditionally probably in our top 3 riskiest industries from an insolvency or probability of default perspective, and certainly from a slow payment perspective as well. I think the industry's definitely got better with that, and there's pressure from government on the large players, and there's just general pressure to pay bills not on time, but closer to on time than what we're used to. But what we're seeing at the moment is payment times are still the worst in the construction industry out of all of them, but not necessarily translating into insolvency. I think they're a little bit fairly undone. So the industry is a little bit fairly targeted by the media, and that's probably my question to everyone else. I'd be keen to see what everyone else thinks about that later on. But they're not seeing the highest increases from a percentage perspective when we look at insolvencies, out of ASIC. Probably, I think that, racking my brain, they're coming in at sort of 4th or 5th at the moment, which could potentially change. But you don't hear about the other industries as much as you do hear about collapses in the insolvency space. In the construction space.
So I'd now like to move on to Adam and ask you a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of property development across the different sectors, commercial, industrial and residential. Are we going to sort of see boom times return in 2023?
Look, I think the idea of a boom time in 2023 from a new development point of view might be sort of stretching the friendship a little bit. I think we're about to enter, and I think we're already in what is a reasonably challenging development period. Now, if we go back a couple of years, effectively, the industry saw nearly every indicator fall off a cliff. Everyone put everything on hold. Demand then spiked enormously, and then the industry played catch up. And obviously, all of the resultant impacts that we see today around pricing and supply chain and everything else is a function of that. What's happened from an interest rate point of view, I think, is critical to the outlook for real estate over the coming couple of years. When you see central banks sort of spike their rates up to levels that I guess people expected, the idea of a cash-free rate of 4% hasn't been crazy as a concept, but I think what's really kind of stunned the industry is the speed at which the interest rate increases, both from the United States and then here in Australia, not to the same extent, have happened. So what that does moving forward for commercial real estate is it really changes the expectation around what kind of yield or what kind of capitalization rate does an asset demand. And there's always been the relationship between the risk-free rate and the ultimate capitalization rate of a commercial asset. So that's a big question in terms of where yields for commercial property go over the coming years. We've got this kind of bifurcation of real estate, particularly office and particularly industrial and retail, where really, really good quality, strategic, highly demanded assets are still holding up from a yield point of view, from a valuation point of view. And there's many pundits out there that think that's going to continue in spite of changing kind of risk-free cash rates. But then there's the secondary assets, which in the industrial space, might be development land with less desirable buildings on them, with less desirable tenants. In the commercial space, might be B grade, C grade, secondary office buildings, and in the retail space would be underutilized, under rented, perhaps challenged assets. So this kind of notion of two speeds to each of those commercial property segments, I think, is something that we're going to see more and more of. And you hear and read, and we publish about brown discounts as well for certain types of assets. So I think that's going to be really interesting from a pain and gain perspective over the coming years. In the residential space, affordability is the key thing, right? So you've seen the borrowing potential of the average punter get hammered by interest rate rises, but at the same time, the rental or the capacity for an average Australian to rent a property has been impacted by the inflationary pressures. So those two forces, whether you're an owner occupier or a renter, are really going to take hold. And then from a development point of view, that sort of puts a cap on the total sort of end values that you can try and achieve. So my gut feel, my sense is that over the next couple of years, there's going to be some sort of very specific sector kind of recalibration. Things like vacant industrial land, I think, would be at risk. Things like secondary office buildings would be at risk unless there's a very clear turnaround play. And I think some of the high-end, super high-end luxury residential parts of the market will be challenged via sort of just confidence and affordability. But taking another big step back, just fundamentally, Australia's in good nick. But low unemployment, generally speaking, we've got reasonably low interest rates from a historical point of view, strong economic growth, which is sort of pegged towards our favour when things get tough. So I think we're in a good place in a slightly challenging environment with pockets of opportunity and pockets of risk.
Do you think that we'll see some projects be mothballed, and if so, what would they be?
Yeah, I think definitely, and we're already seeing it at the moment. Talking to some developers that I work with, the expectation is that permit approved development sites of substance will be coming back onto the market at a higher rate. I've already started to see those listings kind of increase. That's developers that have purchased sites thought they could buy it for a particular, so thought that they could potentially build it for a particular amount. They get a shock, they have a heart attack. It's got to cost 30% more. I might try and dispose of it. So the question then is, what sort of situation is that developer in to then either hit a market price or to dispose of it at an opportunistic price for somebody else? So I think permit approved development sites will come back, depending where you are, and it will depend on sort of the extent of that. Then I think it's just kind of new emerging sectors like the life sciences and health sector, the build to rent sector, and a few others will sort of feed back into that opportunism. So sites that were once built to sell, residential developments in, say, the fringe of Melbourne, are getting snapped up by build to rent developers. Sites that were once thought of to be a retail centre or a commercial office precinct where there's sort of softening demand for those two things might reposition into the life sciences and education sector. So I think there's always those sorts of transitions that happen, but again, I think it's a reasonably tempered kind of couple of years for the broader industry. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. Now let's have a look at some of the issues around supply chain bottlenecks. Sarah, if I can ask you, obviously Patrick said things are starting to normalise. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely, Ali, and I agree with what Patrick had said, although I think it's going to take a while for it to feed through the market. Some of the bottlenecks we're seeing over the last 18 months to 2 years that were particularly acute in steel, copper, nickel, aluminium facades. They're plateauing, and there's things like the steel futures price we saw 6 months ago is easing. We're seeing steel down about 45% this year. Other examples, reinforcement's fallen 20% from the peak. Timber's 2/3 lower than what it was at its peak. And copper as well has seen a steady decline. I think while the copper price in particular brings down the cost of piping and power cabling, copper's considered a dependable barometer of economic health, and I think the other side of that is falling prices could be a bad omen for the global economy. Still seeing impacts from transport costs with the war in Ukraine, although shipping, and Patrick touched on this, has come down. However, the last couple of days, the news with the tugboat giant Svitzer, hundreds of workers threatened to be stood down or locked out from ports. That could just start a whole nother impact for Australia in terms of supply chain. So yeah, that's got the potential to create absolute chaos. So yeah, they're it's looking a lot better from the material costs in particular, but there are some I think we've seen over the last few years that the precarious nature of cost predictions and how things can turn around with floods and the war in Ukraine and now this sort of industrial action. It's sort of coming from all fronts. So yeah.
It's Christmas when the strikes have started. I'm sure the Post is next week's strike. So what sort of impact is that having on the cost of construction, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think prices are normalising, and we're expecting that to sort of go to sort of 4 to 6% in the major centres over 2023. And then after that, probably reverting to 3 to 4% average. Now, that's for the major centres. Obviously, Tasmania and WA are probably higher than that. They're impacted more so with economies of scale and supply chain. So I think, again, we always qualify it on these sort of once in a lifetime events that seem to happen quite regularly these days. But I think projects, we're seeing a lot of the large contractors still trying to fill their pipeline. Take, for example, in Victoria, one of the tier ones really needs work. So that's going to help with pricing, I think. On the other side, margins are going up, which I think they need to after a number of years of really low margins way before COVID. And I'm sure, I'm not sure who will speak about subcontractors and margins in that market as well. So yeah, it's a tricky time, but definitely we're seeing some more realistic pricing and projects getting off the ground rather than sort of being mothballed, which was sort of the view a few months ago, or even, yeah, as much as a couple of months ago, where it just wasn't stacking up because of the high pricing.
Yeah, it is nice to see things normalise a little. So that's a good segue to Jeanette, who's got her eye on the ball of the smaller end of the market. So let's talk about smaller construction firms first. How are they faring? Are things improving for them as well, Jeanette?
Look, just before we go there, I just wanted to pick up on something that Patrick said about the supply chain index, and back in February 2020. It's sort of interesting for me with the insolvency background to note that insolvency appointments haven't even caught up to where we were in 2020. So if it feels doomy and gloomy, it's not. It's like we're not even back to where we were pre-COVID. So we're getting there. And look, it wasn't a busy time back in 2020 in any event. So that's sort of, you know, this whole idea of normalizing seems to be starting to kick in. But in terms of, you know, the smaller construction side of the market, I put it in the white paper, and you know, it's worth repeating again. The profitable firms are those that watch their margins, and they need to at the smaller end of the market. It's really, really important, and it's nice to hear Sarah mentioning that those margins are starting to go up. But having said that, you know, I speak to a lot of subcontractors and subcontractor organisations, and a lot of them are doing it really tough. One example is a subcontractor who's expected to deliver very quickly, might get paid 45 to 60 days later, maybe only 20% of their invoice, and then drip fed along the way. And there are other terrible stories about slow payments, but on the positive side, they expect eventually to get paid. Some, of course, don't result in that, and we see collapses, and that can be catastrophic for a smaller player who lives, you know, from invoice to invoice, and there's plenty of them in that industry. And so it calls into question for me, how are some of these smaller projects being funded? And you know, you'd sort of think, well, the retentions have long been considered a part of a capital funding option for developers and builders and others. But equally, I'm now hearing stories about certain invoices getting back charges and parts of payment advances being withheld on top of the retention. So, you know, it is sounding a little bit tough out there at the smaller end, I'd have to say. So we only hope that will improve.
Thank you very much for mentioning the white paper. I should tell today's audience that we have got a white paper available on the Creditor Watch website of the same name, Rebuilding Australia's Construction Industry. And I would encourage everybody to go to the website after this session and download the white paper for some more insights into this very interesting topic. So back to you, Jeanette. Let's talk a little bit about subbies. We've talked about small construction firms. What about subbies? What's happening at that end of the market?
Okay, so we've I'm based here in Queensland, and recently we've had a largish collapse. Anecdotally, even though there were 286 creditors on that particular matter, various commentators are saying that they're surprised that it wasn't more. There wasn't a larger amount of carnage, so to speak, in relation to that. So it sort of calls into question, well, what's happening with the government legislation? And it looks like, particularly in Queensland, that maybe some of that is starting to have a positive impact in that, you know, you've got the money's owed process, and you've also got the minimum financial requirements system that we have up here in the QBCC audits. And they may be starting to have some bite on certain people, and maybe those that are distressed and potentially undercapitalised having to act quicker than they may have in the past. So they're reaching a fork in the road potentially where they've decided, oh, the writing's on the wall, that we're going to get found out much quicker and we need to take some action. And so that has less of an impact on those that rely on those projects succeeding. So potentially that's what's starting to happen there. It doesn't hurt any less if you get caught at the end of the chain, but perhaps we might be beginning to see less carnage.
That would be, welcome for everybody. So I'd like to now move across to Michelle. So data can make all the difference in terms of helping a business. It can make or break a business. So tell me about the importance of data and also data technology to help construction firms get over what is still a pretty tricky trading environment.
Yeah, thanks, Ali. And I totally agree with my other co-panelists that a lot of things are getting back to normal or at least improving, but it's still pretty turbulent times out there as far as supplies, as far as interest rates and inflation, and a big factor I think everyone is facing is staffing, being able to retain and get the people that we need. And in these turbulent times, data and technology are critical. We need data tech to observe, identify and manage work on a micro and also a macro level. Everything from specific project and stakeholder information so that we can keep an eye on the details to having an accurate picture of the current state of the market so we know where we need to navigate. And we strongly believe that sector-specific data technology, stuff that's designed for the construction industry, empowers the industry businesses to diversify their market and expand their network. It's critical to allow them to build a longer and more future-proof pipeline, because we don't know 1,000,000% what's around the corner, but we can try and be smart about it. And they can also improve efficiency by implementing a more strategic approach to business management and development. Lastly, we really believe that increased transparency and options in products and services are a life raft in a crisis where lead times might be improving when it comes to products, but costs are still high.
What's the best way for construction firms to use the data at their fingertips to make a success of their business?
Thanks for that question as well. The construction sector is big, one of the biggest, and it's super diverse. And we know that the solutions need to be just as diverse. So I'll cut it into just a few sections, and these could all be subsected further over and over again. But broadly speaking, suppliers and manufacturers of construction products can gain immediate benefits from a project lead sourcing and management solution, which not only offers them opportunities best suited to their particular products, but it's also really critical that they can ensure that they can secure those deals by having the right data and tools to keep their products specified, so they don't waste a whole bunch of time, energy and money in trying to get their products involved only to lose it at construction stage when everything gets purchased. And then we have architects who for decades have been using software for specification writing, building information modeling or BIM, to design more quickly and accurately. And it's not only having the most advanced tools, but the best available product data, especially in these times, which can make all the difference to their efficiency and being able to get the right outcome for their clients. And the last subsector have already been talked about by some of my co-panelists, the builders and subbies, who are under pretty severe pressure at the moment. Being able to rely on early stage and tender data, as well as tech solutions like e-tendering platforms, allows them to win work and do it more efficiently and sustain and grow their businesses through tough times.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm going to move across to Adam in a minute, but before I do that, I do encourage everyone in the audience to send through their questions. In a few moments, we're going to have some time for questions from the audience. But before we do that, I want to just quickly ask Adam about one of the structural changes in the sector, which is the rise of online shopping, which obviously created huge demand for industrial assets at the start of the pandemic. One of the comments I think you made was that there may be sort of less sort of demand for industrial land going forward. What do you see in terms of demand for industrial land and for that sector in general?
I think the big picture is that the demand is still really, really high. It's just my comment there in relation to values was that they've probably just overshot a little bit more than what's reasonably sustainable. But the long arc of the demand profile is that there is so much demand for e-commerce and logistics related real estate, and that's not going anywhere. I think, you know, the interesting part about what COVID did was it really brought forward probably 4 or 5, maybe up to 10 years of demand for logistics related space, and that's not going anywhere. And I think the other bit to really sort of unpack there is that when we talk about logistics and the demand that comes from a real estate point of view, it's everything from major distribution precincts or distribution facilities that sort of require 10, 20 hectares through to the kind of facilities that are required in the middle of a city for that last mile logistics and everything kind of in between. I think there's also been this kind of really interesting kind of confluence of the logistics, but also the office and the workspaces and the retail and the experiential real estate occupants that all kind of come together. And a good example would be, you know, inner city brownfield real estate converting into storage, brewery, co-working spaces, and you know, some sort of kind of funky retail experience that might relate to some of the online businesses that connect back into the logistics space that's there as well. So this confluence of different uses becoming sort of more aligned and actually more interesting that's at the kind of the inner city level. So it's an extremely interesting sector. I remember, you know, studying in university, and the option of studying logistics and industrial real estate was a choice, and it was certainly nowhere near as glamorous as residential or luxury apartments. But for those people that took the major in that particular space, I'm sure they're having a good laugh today. But it's a fascinating sector, and our cities have a long way to go in relation to adoption of more.
Yes, it's amazing what becomes sexy over time, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to ask everyone a wrap-up question before I move across to Patrick, who'll be able to take some questions from the audience. So my question to everyone is, what needs to happen to affect a turnaround in construction? So Patrick, what do you think needs to happen?
Time. That's probably the only thing that's really going to get us there. I think there was a good point made. I think it was Sarah, was that while there's some positive signs, that takes a fair amount of time to wash through. I think arguably there's still some of the negative aspects of the last 12 months still to rush through first, right? So I don't think we're certainly not at the top. We know that insolvencies are climbing back to pre-COVID levels. Construction's pretty sure always the number one on a monthly or quarterly basis. We're actually going to see this really random dip in October, which I think is due to probably all of the school holidays and various public holidays that we had. The Queen's morning as well, falling on a Thursday, meant that, you know, it became a 3-day weekend, and Melbourne seems to get a public holiday every week through sort of September, October with football and also Melbourne Cup. Anyway, so we see a dip there. So I think timing, you know, a lot of it's got to wash through. There's a lot of firms that probably are, I won't say insolvent, but are just dormant, that need to actually be wound up. I think there's a lot of firms that are just haven't updated their ASIC, you know, submitted their annual ASIC submission and will ultimately be struck off. So we'll see some that actually do have creditors, some that don't. but really timing is going to be the big thing. And until there's certainty as well to the whole, particularly from an investment perspective, the cost of capital, the cost of goods has gone up significantly. That means that people aren't going to be taking those punts anymore. They'll wait until that settles down before they do. So that's probably my answer.
Thank you, Patrick. Adam, what's your view? What needs to happen for a turnaround?
It was certainty until you just pitched it then, but it sort of relates to what I was going to then sort of expand on, which is confidence, right? And the confidence is bred off the certainty. I think a couple of things are really important in relation to that. I mean, obviously knowing that the interest rate cycle is tapering, and if that's happened sooner than everyone expects, I think that's a really positive thing for the broader industry. So there's probably a bit more hope than most pundits were anticipating pre-Christmas that that's actually tapering, and that's then correlated very closely to inflation, right? So once there's a bit of certainty around the inflation piece and the interest rate cycle, then the confidence will come back. And then, at the same time, if we can tell that the construction cost, escalations are also aligned to the inflation, and all of a sudden we can see a picture of what the next couple of years looks like with a higher degree of certainty than what we've got and had over the last 12 months, then that bodes really, really well for the market. The interesting part around all of that is, does the economics of property development stack up based on all of the inputs once that certainty is there? That's a big question mark that I've got around expectations around, what developers can buy and sell land for, and what it's actually the reset level of, production costs are, construction, and then the reset revenues in a particular development. I think the jury's out whether the market has come between buyers and sellers to an agreement on what the new economics are for property development, but the certainty and those interest rate cycles and inflation and construction costs, we can see what they look like over the next couple of years, and I think the market will pretty quickly reset, and it will get back onto the next phase of a cycle, I guess.
So I guess we're approaching a normalization, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, for anyone in property development, a rising market or an inflationary market is not actually a really desirable thing. Of course, everyone wants their revenues to kick, but if their costs are kicking at the same time, it's a hard thing to manage. Whereas in a reasonably stable kind of like predictable 3% kind of phase, then I think a lot of developers are happy with the decision making that goes into that. So I think even if we're going into a period of low growth, low escalation, then that's cool. I think the property industry will see positivity in that certainty.
That's great. Sarah, what's your view on when things might recover?
Yeah, I think, well, the confidence, certainty, that would be the top two. I think a couple of things need to happen, and probably around Australia, the CBD activation, I think will not just from an occupancy for commercial owners, landlords, but also from a nighttime and retail and perspective. I think that will really, there's still so much capacity and room for improvement in those CBD activation numbers. I think the other one's probably more an opportunity, and it might feed into what Adam was saying in terms of ESG and embodied carbon, driving local manufacturing. I think some of those more I suppose, I wouldn't say macro because it's local, but some of that innovation that can come out of it is a real opportunity, and I think that will make the difference in terms of productivity, which will help with that whole numbers game around margins for developers in the future. We've got to do things differently, and this is a huge opportunity to do that. So yeah, I think it's an exciting, really exciting time to sort of drive innovation in our supply chains and in the way we do things, which we're seeing already with build to rent and other, last mile delivery that Adam touched on before. So exciting times.
Thank you, Sarah. Jeanette, at the smaller end of the market, what needs to happen for recovery?
Okay, well, strangely enough, we had a change of government this year, which I think, you know, it feels pretty seamless. I don't think, you know, you feel like there's been a major impact from that. But what's come from that is a number of inquiries, particularly in the insolvency space. So we've got ASIC, and not necessarily the insolvency space, but the regulation space. So we've got an ASIC inquiry that got announced within the last month, and we've also got an insolvency inquiry, which is really broad. It's basically can put a submission in about anything that's not working in any part of the process. So I suppose what I would think about that is that some of the things that might be able to help people at the smaller end of the market is look at preferential payments. When a company does go into liquidation, do we really need to then punish those subcontractors and others by clawing back payments from them when, you know, they probably had no idea? I've heard it said many times they had no idea that the builder was entering into this zone of insolvency. So I think here's an opportunity for the government to really look at the fairness of that piece of legislation and try to bring some more balance into it. I mean, they have made some changes there where it's in certain circumstances you can't claw back less than $30,000 within a certain period of time, but I think they need to go a little bit further. And on top of that, I think Queensland specific, perhaps because we've got different rules in different states, retentions. I think we really need to look at how these retentions are working on the smaller end, and is there another way, and how can we help the builders the subcontractors to get access to the retentions a lot faster and make sure that they end up with them and it's not just a discount on their invoice. That's it from me. Thank you.
And finally, Michelle, what's your view on the trajectory for a turnaround?
Thanks, Ali. As far as my view, I mean, I'd like to represent a lot of the developers, builders and architects that we recently surveyed and interviewed, including Adam. Thanks, Adam, for an upcoming report. And it was really interesting when we asked them questions around this topic, because a lot of firms told us about innovative solutions they were figuring out in their own sphere to navigate the issues and improve things. But there was also a lot of calls for government support. And it wasn't necessarily just give us money. It was get inflation under control, get some certainty there. It was remove some of the bureaucratic hurdles that come in, especially in pre-construction phases, so people can just get the projects done that people need. And it was also about some bigger picture non-crisis related things. So a lot of people are actually looking at, for instance, ESD, environmental sustainable design in construction, which for a long time has been hugely important to people inside and outside the industry, but kind of got sidelined as other more urgent things seem to be more pressing. So yeah, there are a lot of people calling for that to be reprioritized and to be supported financially with regulations, and to be brought back into the conversation. So I think all of those, or any or all of those things, as well as what my colleagues have said, would help.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to throw back to Patrick, who will close off the session. Over to you, Patrick.
I'm going to ask a couple more questions anyway. I know we're quite at the end, and if any of the panelists do have a hard stop, don't be shy to interrupt. But we've got a bunch of questions that have come through, and I think there's some good ones in here, if that's all right with everyone. But if you do have to go, I appreciate it. And the same to our attendees as well. We do record this and share it, so you can always jump back in. There's a question, Jeanette, you mentioned retention. There was a question that came through that is another language to me, but then you mentioned retention, which is good. So I'll put you on the spot here, but if anyone else wanted to have a go at it, please do. It's talking around, it's basically saying, is anyone aware of data, or is there data being captured around the dollar value of cash retentions still held by builders, historical retentions yet to be paid out in Queensland? There is some concern that the rollout of retention trust accounts in private projects creates a cash flow pinch point for builders who can't benefit from retentions in their cash flow moving forward, yet still have to pay out historical retentions.
Why don't we just take that as a comment and say it's got so many hairs all over it, this whole retention area. It's just hideous. And when a company collapses, of course, you know, some of these are not only, they're not cash, they're guarantees, they're bonds in some cases, or bank guarantees, and it further complicates the situation. And you know, an insolvency scenario, once that turns to cash, that goes to the liquidator, and the liquidator can distribute that amongst subcontractors who may have charges. In Queensland, we have an added complication up here as well, and you can charge some of those funds. Whereas if it stays as a bank guarantee and doesn't get split open, it can go straight back to the bank. So there's a lot of competing claims in relation to these retentions. It's complicated, and I'm certainly not going to go into it here, sorry.
All right, we've addressed it. That's good. Did anyone else have want to touch that hot potato there? If not, I'll keep moving forward. Some no's. Adam, one for you. Could the recent bad weather lead to a recovery or even a boom in the construction industry? So assuming that we get some, you know, consistent weather in the future, thinking about those sort of flood ravaged, even the bushfire sort of areas that have been hit hard, that they need to be redeveloped at some point. Is that a potential positive, glass half full view coming through in this question?
It certainly is. Look, as someone that's building a house at the moment, I can tell you that every day I wake up and there's a blue sky is one less day of you know, PTSD. But the interesting thing about the weather is it's sort of a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one side, we've had these serious weather events where not only have they now required rebuilding works, but a lot of those rebuilding works are being, you know, managed or funded via the insurers, and so the insurance work is a much more desirable piece of work to get than generally a private practice work for most subbies and tradies. I'm interested to perhaps if others have different views of that, but the feedback that I get from subbies is it pays really well and they pay quick, and you can get in there and knock it out pretty well. So a lot of the, you know, the labour that's already in short supply is attracted to this insurance building work. Again, from an economic point of view, it's good work. It's good stuff. You know, it'll all contribute to GDP. It'll all come back into better retail sales at Christmas. It'll mean more cars get bought. All those sorts of things that make a positive contribution to the economy. It will continue to support, but at the same time, put additional pressure on the industry. When you then look at, you know, a clear run of weather over the course of maybe the next 6 months, if La Nina doesn't sort of materialise, it certainly hasn't insofar as Queensland is concerned. Everyone was expecting pretty much September, October, November to be rained out here in Queensland, and it's not been the case. It's been blue skies and moderate temperatures. So we've that's been a shot in the arm for people to get on and actually double down, and a lot of builders that I know are playing catch up now. So you know, can we get to, you know, lock up by a certain day, and can we actually now double down and try and do things quicker to try and make up some of that lost time? So I'm not sure whether it's a positive in the sense of it being, you know, a free for all in terms of growth, but there are lots of positive attributes to it. So I'd say yes.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. And as I ask these questions, feel free to jump in if you've got additional comments to make.
I might do that just on that one, Patrick. Just I think it's hard to find a silver lining with the events we've had weather-wise. However, in the same way, I think that going back to the innovation piece and local manufacturing with bushfires, with, you know, wet weather, we've got to surely take it and look at different, like prefab, which we sort of had a bit of resurgence a couple of years ago. Hopefully that will start again, how we build quickly off-site, take it to site and deal with the short-term issues of housing, I think, in areas, as well as, you know, longer-term issues around innovation and just protecting sort of local manufacturing.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Next question. We've been seeing several tier 1 to tier 2 builders buying subcontracting businesses, hiring labour onto payroll. Are we seeing this in other states? And is this do we see this sort of continuing trend of subcontracting sort of not dying, obviously, but seeing those larger builders obviously bring labour and the typical subcontracting roles back onto the payroll? Any comments here on that one? That's a new one.
I'll just jump in. Probably not so much subbies, but definitely de-risking in terms of buying a concrete plant and stockpiling reinforcement, and I think that will be a focus moving forward for the big contractors, really trying to shore up their supply chains by bringing it in-house.
Yep. Adam, did you have a comment there?
Oh, I've got a question for Sarah, to be entirely honest, on that one. Is vertical integration, like, that's an interesting thing to consider, is the vertical integration of contractors to de-risk further, to have more control and to probably presumably lower price. Are you seeing that trend generally anywhere? Like, I haven't really seen a huge amount myself, but it would make sense when times get really tough. It's just a different risk proposition as a contractor then.
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. I agree. I haven't really seen it other than that material supply chain, but it would be great. And I don't think from a cost perspective, I think from a risk and just the sophistication of head contractors, I think we've, going back, 15, 20 years, there was more of, the carpenters and concreters often work, well, concreters definitely with some of the big builders like Grocon, that they did it all, which was a great way to minimise risk, I think. So yeah, I think it'd be good to see more of it from a sophistication, from a client's perspective, dealing with a contractor and having, 40, 50, 60% of your dollars in that business, rather than it being spread to who knows who is going to be on your sites and who could fall over.
All right, thank you, everyone. I'm conscious of time. There are two more questions, but I'll let them go through to the keeper. One was more of a comment, just supporting what Jeanette said earlier. And James, if you're still online, I'm sorry to pick on you, buddy. I'll buy you a beer the next time I see you. But I think you are correct. Just making a point there around if demand got pushed forward because of COVID, would we expect to see a disproportionate number of insolvencies? And I think we see that across a number of industries, right? When there's a hot industry, buy now, pay later, real estate, doesn't really matter. You see an influx of people into it, seeing quick, easy money, and then when it gets tough, that they realise it's not for them in the long term. So, James, I agree with you there. So I've answered that question. So that beer is no longer on the table. So everyone, I just wanted to wrap up. I really appreciate the panelists hanging around a little bit longer than is scheduled, and also for all of the attendees as well. We got well over 200 there, which is a phenomenal effort. So thank you all so much. Not long to go now in the year, probably about 4 weeks. Very much got my sales hat on when I think about how many working days and weeks are left. Adam, Michelle, Jeanette, Sarah, great to have you as part of the commentary today. So thank you very much. And Ali, as always, being a fantastic moderator for us and host, thank you again. And thank you to the team at Creditor Watch, of course, for putting together a fantastic white paper and also a fantastic webinar for us today. So don't be shy to jump online and have a look at that white paper. You can download it at creditorwatch.com.au, jump onto the news hub. And you can also see the business risk index will be out tomorrow, but you can see the historical ones and some of the stats too. So without further ado, thank you all very much. Stay safe, and we're almost at Christmas. So